Much of the news cycle over the past week has been preoccupied with the leaked Signal group chat involving some of the highest-ranking members of the Trump administration. That chat revealed details of U.S. airstrikes on Houthi targets in Yemen before they happened, and offered an interesting insight into the geopolitical worldviews of some of the key figures in the Trump administration. But beyond the drama, which was widely covered in the media, this story raises big questions about U.S. global leadership, and it offers a perfect case study for understanding a key concept in international relations, hegemonic stability theory. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Global Insights, where we use political science and international relations to make sense of today's headlines. I'm Noah Zerbe. I'm a professor of international relations at California State Polytechnic University, Humboldt. And in this episode, I want to explore what we can learn about the future of global politics from the leaked chat. So, what exactly happened here? In short, Jeffrey Goldberg, an editor for The Atlantic, was accidentally added to a private Signal chat group with top Trump administration officials, including Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, Vice President J.D. Vance, Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, and others. The chat discussed in real time specific operational details of an impending U.S. strike against Houthi targets in Yemen. Goldberg reportedly received information on weapon systems, targeting priorities, and attack sequencing 2 hours before the strikes were launched. The breach prompted outrage, particularly over the apparent cavalier use of the private messaging app to discuss plans and military operations. But it also shone light on internal dissent, with Vance questioning the rationale for U.S. action in a region where European interests were arguably more at stake than America's. And I do want to note that D.N.I. Gabbard and Secretary of State Rubio, among others, have declared that the materials were not classified, though a close reading suggests it was also not intended for public dissemination. One exchange in the thread highlights in particular tensions between President Trump and Vice President Vance, as well as a pretty strong sense of disdain for what they describe as Europe's lackadaisical reliance on the United States. In the thread, Vance writes, "I think we're making a mistake. 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez Canal. 40% of European trade does. There's a real risk that the public doesn't understand this or why it's necessary. The strongest reason to do this, as POTUS, the President of the United States, said, is to send a message. But I'm not sure the President is aware how inconsistent this message is with his message on Europe right now. There's a further risk that we see a moderate to severe spike in oil prices. I am willing to support the consensus of the team and to keep these concerns to myself. But there is a strong argument for delaying this a month, doing the messaging work on why this matters, seeing where the economy is, etc." In response to Vance's concerns, Joe Kent, John Radcliffe, and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth all essentially agree that they could wait a month. But Mike Waltz expands on Vance's concerns, writing, "The trade figures we have are 15% of global and 30% of container. It's difficult to break that down specific to the U.S., specific because much of the container either going through the Red Sea still or around the Cape of Good Hope are components going to Europe that turn into manufactured goods for transatlantic trade to the United States. Whether we pull the plug or not today, European navies do not have the capability to defend against these types of sophisticated anti-ship cruise missiles and drones the Houthis are now using. So whether it's now or several weeks from now, it will still have to be the United States that reopens these shipping lanes. Per the President's request, we are working with DoD and state to determine how to compile the costs associated and lay them on the Europeans. As we stated in the first PC, we have a fundamental decision of allowing the sea lanes to remain closed or to reopen them now or later. We are the only ones with the capability, unfortunately." From a messaging standpoint, we absolutely add this to of horrible on why the Europeans must now invest in their defense. Vance then responds, telling Hegseth, "If you think we should do it, let's go," but stating, "I just hate bailing Europe out once again." Hegseth responds to Vance, saying, "I fully share your loathing of European freeloading. It's pathetic. But Mike Waltz is correct. We're the only ones on the planet, on our side of the ledger, who can do this. Nobody else even close. Question is timing. I feel like now is as good a time as any, given POTUS directive to reopen shipping lanes. I think we should go. Senior advisor to the president, Stephen Miller, then writes, "As I heard it, the president was clear, green light, but we soon make clear to Egypt and Europe what we expect in return. We also need to figure out how to enforce such a requirement, e.g. if Europe doesn't remunerate, then what? If the U.S. successfully restores freedom of navigation at great cost, there needs to be some further economic gain extracted in return." Less than 2 hours later, the operation was launched from the Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, including at least 2 waves of attacks by FA-18 Super Hornets, MQ-9 Reaper drone strikes, and ship-launched Tomahawk cruise missiles. While the exchanges in the leaked transcript are interesting in their own right, and have sparked a variety of calls for investigations by both Republicans and Democrats in the U.S. Senate, I want to focus more specifically on what this tells us about the shifting nature of the global system. Indeed, this isn't just bureaucratic squabbling. It's a textbook example of a theory from international relations, one that tries to explain how the global order works and why it sometimes doesn't. Hegemonic stability theory is a concept from international relations that argues that the global order is most stable when a single powerful state, the hegemon, takes on the role of providing public goods like security, free trade, economic stability, and, at least in the post-World War II era, freedom of navigation of the seas. The idea of hegemonic stability goes back to the work of Charles Kindleberger, who studied the Great Depression and argued that the global economic collapse happened because no single power, after the decline of Britain and before the rise of the United States, was able or willing to lead. Later, scholars like Robert Gilpin expanded the idea into security and political realms. The United States played this hegemonic role in much of the post-World War II era, underwriting institutions like NATO, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, and offering military protection and economic leadership, particularly in Europe in the context of the Cold War. To be clear, the hegemon does not perform this role or this function out of altruism. While it does bear a disproportionate share of the cost of maintaining the international system, it also benefits from that global order through open markets, peace, influence, and so on, and those benefits generally outweigh the costs. In the current case, the United States acting alone to conduct airstrikes on Houthi targets can be seen as an example of hegemonic behavior. Even if the primary beneficiary of secure shipping lanes in the Red Sea is Europe because of their heavier reliance on the Suez Canal, the United States steps in to stabilize the system. That's a classic hegemon move, provide the public good even while others might free ride. And as we saw in the leaked messages, perceived frustration with European free riding was front and center. Both Vance and Hegseth complained about bailing out Europe once again. This is where the collective action problem comes in, a concept from political economy that explains why cooperation in large groups is hard. The benefit of stable shipping lanes are shared, but the costs of maintaining those trade routes are not. The hegemon, here the United States, pays the price in money, risk, and reputation. It also ties into alliance politics. If the United States is consistently forced to act while allies hesitate, it can create a problem of alliance cohesion. The internal message from Vance reveal a deeper concern. How can the United States demand that Europe defend itself while also stepping in every time things get too dangerous? It's a credibility problem, not just with allies, but with the American public too. And credibility matters. If allies or adversaries begin to believe the United States won't follow through or is internally divided, as the chat revealed, it can destabilize deterrence, a problem we discussed in an earlier video. The messiness of this leak reinforces perceptions of a divided, erratic hegemon, potentially weakening the effectiveness and scope of U.S. leadership globally. But here's the catch. The United States can't not act. If it steps back, the risk is that no one else steps in to fill the vacuum. That's the hegemon's dilemma. Do too much and others free ride. Do too little and the system may collapse. It's a recurring theme in U.S. foreign policy, especially in the Trump era, where America First rhetoric clashes with the hegemonic responsibilities. The Vance quote, "I just hate bailing Europe out again," captures this tension perfectly. So what does this episode tell us? It reveals how fragile hegemonic stability really is. It shows the limits of unilateral action in a multilateral world, and it reminds us that even the most powerful actors depend on perceptions of competence, coordination, and control. And I think it also highlights some of the ways in which the United States, under President Trump's America First agenda, is retreating from this historical position. So, what can we learn from all of this? First, President Trump's insistence that European allies must pay for U.S. military protection and action, like the airstrikes in Yemen, and suggestions that NATO members aren't contributing their fair share mark a rejection of the hegemon's traditional role in providing security as a public good. This is a stark departure from past U.S. policy, which treated such expenditures as a necessary investment in maintaining the global order. And by questioning U.S. commitments to NATO and ridiculing European freeloading, the Trump administration undermines credibility and predictability that the hegemon must project. Allies rely on consistent support, and when that support is framed as conditional or optional, the alliance system weakens, undermining the hegemon's own influence and stability it's supposed to sustain. Further, President Trump's broad skepticism towards multilateral institutions and preference for bilateral deals reflects a shift away from the institutional architecture built and maintained by the U.S. hegemon post-1945. This move away from cooperative, rules-based engagement erodes the very system hegemonic stability theory says the hegemon is supposed to uphold. And finally, President Trump's foreign policy often prioritizes domestic political messaging over international stability, as seen in the Yemen airstrikes framing as a rebuke of the Biden administration. This reduces the hegemon's actions to political theater rather than systemic leadership, weakening global confidence in U.S. stewardship of the existing global order. The leaked chat wasn't just a security breach. It was a window into the inner workings of a global hegemon trying to manage a world that doesn't always want to be managed, and indeed may want to change. It raises questions about U.S. leadership, responsibility, and the sustainability of U.S. global power. But the exchange also highlights ongoing shifts in U.S. foreign policy towards Europe and NATO under Trump, and suggests that the United States is no longer willing, or perhaps is no longer able, to fulfill the role of hegemon as described in hegemonic stability theory. As the United States steps back from providing collective goods, upholding alliances, and defending multilateral institutions, the foundational principles of hegemonic stability theory erode, raising questions about whether a stable international order can be maintained without a committed and capable hegemonic leader. And if that's the case, it's not entirely clear what comes next. But what do you think this episode says about the future of the global order? Are we witnessing the end of the American century? And if so, what comes next? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.